I've always had a rule. Don't fall for your best friend's brother. It's messy, it's dangerous, and worst of all, it can ruin everything. But rules, I've learned, are easier to follow when you're not living in the same house as temptation. This started 2 months ago, when I moved in with my best friend Jesse. I had just broken up with my long-term boyfriend, lost my lease, and needed a place to crash while I figured things out. Jesse offered his family spare bedroom. No rent, just buy your own damn groceries, as he joked. The catch? His older brother, Ben, had just moved back home too. Ben was the guy who always made me nervous, even back in high school. He was 3 years older than us, always had that moody, serious energy. Popular in a don't talk to me unless you want your feelings hurt kind of way. I remember being 15, sitting at Jesse's kitchen table doing homework, and feeling Ben's eyes on me as he walked past shirtless after a run. I pretended not to notice. I always pretended. Now I was 24 and sleeping just down the hall from him. The first few days were fine, civil, distant. We barely spoke. I figured we'd avoid each other and it would be easy. But then one night, I walked into the kitchen after a shower, still damp and half-dressed, and there he was, leaning against the counter with a beer in his hand, looking at me like I was something else. "You always walk around half naked, or is this just for me?" he asked, lips tugging into a smirk. I froze, towel hanging low on my hips. I thought no one was home. Ben shrugged, taking a sip. "Don't let me stop you." I rolled my eyes and reached for the fridge, hoping the blush creeping up my neck wasn't obvious. But from that night on, something changed. It was in the little things. The way he'd bump into me in the hallway and linger a second too long. The way he'd come into the living room when I was watching a movie and sit closer than he needed to. The way he'd ask questions like, "So you and Jesse ever mess around?" with a half smile like he was joking, but not really. And the worst part? I started liking it. One night, Jesse was working late, and I was alone in the house. I made pasta, poured a glass of wine, and curled up on the couch in one of Jesse's oversized hoodies. I was halfway through a dumb reality show when Ben came home. He walked in like he owned the place. He always did, and paused when he saw me. "Didn't think you'd be here alone," he said, toeing off his boots. I shrugged. "I live here now, remember?" He gave me a look I couldn't read, then disappeared into the kitchen. A minute later, he came back with his own glass of wine and flopped down next to me, thigh pressed against mine. "What are we watching?" he asked, already grabbing the remote. We watched for a while in silence, our legs touching the entire time. I told myself it didn't mean anything. We were adults. People touch. Whatever. But then he leaned closer. Just slightly. Barely a breath between us. And I felt it. The tension. The kind that makes your skin buzz and your thoughts go haywire. "You're not what I expected," he said suddenly. I turned my head. "What's that supposed to mean?" He looked at me for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he stood up. "Nothing. Forget it." But I didn't forget, because that was the first time I realized he might be thinking the same things I was. After that night on the couch, something shifted. Ben didn't go back to being distant. If anything, he started showing up more. At first, it was subtle. He'd make coffee when I did, linger longer in the kitchen, or join me when I was watching something dumb on Netflix. We still didn't talk much, but the silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was thick with something else, and I hated how much I liked it. One Saturday morning, Jesse was out with his girlfriend, and I was in the backyard trying to clean up after the dog. Ben's dog, technically. Big, dumb golden retriever named Rocket, who liked to destroy every patch of grass he could find. I was bent over near the bushes, swearing under my breath as I tried to tie off the trash bag without getting anything on my hands, when I heard Ben's voice behind me. "Nice view." I straightened up fast, nearly losing grip of the bag. "Jesus, don't sneak up on people like that." He grinned, unbothered. Holding a mug of coffee like this was just another normal Saturday. "You get this flustered every time someone compliments your ass? Or just when it's me?" I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out. So I just rolled my eyes and tossed the bag into the bin, trying to ignore the warmth spreading up my neck. Ben didn't leave. He followed me back inside, leaning against the kitchen counter as I washed my hands like we were roommates, not two guys who barely spoke until a week ago. He looked relaxed, almost amused, like he enjoyed watching me squirm. "You always this jumpy?" he asked, still sipping his coffee. "Only when someone watches me like I'm a lab rat," I muttered. Ben smirked. "Maybe I'm just curious." "About what?" He paused, his eyes on mine longer than they needed to be. "You," I laughed, but it sounded thin. "You've known me for 10 years. "Not really," he said. "You were just Jesse's quiet friend back then. Always polite, kind of nerdy, wore those awful oversized hoodies." "I still wear those." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, but now you fill them out." That shut me up. I turned to the sink, suddenly very interested in rinsing a cup that didn't need rinsing. "Look," he said after a pause, "I'm not trying to mess with you." "Then what are you doing?" I asked, finally turning to face him. Ben set his cup down, walked over, and stopped just a foot away from me. His voice was low, steady. "I don't know yet, that's what's messing with me." And then he just walked away like he hadn't just casually dropped a bomb on my morning. I didn't see him for the rest of the day. I avoided the living room, stayed in my room, told myself to stop overanalyzing. But my brain wouldn't shut up. That tension, was it just in my head? Was he just flirting to mess with me? Or did he actually mean it? The next few days were quieter, polite, normal, which somehow felt weirder than all the tension. I figured maybe I imagined everything. Maybe he regretted saying what he did. Or maybe I'd misread it all. But then Friday night rolled around. Jesse had gone out for drinks with coworkers. I stayed in, headphones on, half watching YouTube and half working on some freelance stuff. Around 10, I heard a knock on my door. I pulled off my headphones. "Yeah?" Ben poked his head in. "You busy?" I glanced at my screen. "Not really." He stepped in, hands in the pockets of his hoodie, looking less sure of himself than usual. "Want to play something?" he asked. Jesse's PS5 still hooked up in the den. I stared at him for a second. Ben, the same Ben who used to ignore me at family barbecues and tease me for being too quiet, was asking to hang out. "Sure," I said, and followed him down the hall. We played some racing game, both terrible at it, but we didn't care. We laughed, talked trash. It felt weirdly easy, like we'd done it 100 times. Somewhere around the third rematch, I leaned forward to adjust the controller, and Ben reached for his at the same time. Our arms brushed, then stayed there. I looked at him. He looked at me, and just like that, the air shifted again. He didn't move away. Neither did I. My heart was pounding. His eyes dropped to my mouth for a split second. Then he cleared his throat and looked away. "I should head to bed," he said, voice lower than before. I nodded. "Yeah, same." We both stood, not quite looking at each other. He was halfway to the door when I said, "Ben." He turned. "Yeah?" I hesitated. "Nothing. Good night." He stared at me for a beat too long. "Night." The door closed, and I was left standing there, wondering when exactly I'd stopped wanting him to be off limits. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, every second of the night replaying like a loop I couldn't shut off. His arm brushing mine. That look. The way his eyes dropped to my mouth, even if only for a second. It wasn't in my head. Not this time. And the worst part? I wanted it to happen again. The next morning, Jesse was home, and the house felt normal again. Loud, full of the usual sarcastic banter. Ben barely said anything over breakfast. I couldn't tell if it was on purpose, or if I was just hyper-aware of him now. Either way, I kept my head down, pretending my coffee was more interesting than it was. By Sunday, Jesse had plans with his girlfriend again. I figured I'd use the time to catch up on editing some photos and pretend I wasn't counting down the minutes until I was alone in the house with Ben again. It was late afternoon when I heard him knock on my door. I turned from my desk. "Yeah?" He peeked in, eyes a little hesitant. "Want to go for a drive?" "A drive?" I blinked. "Where?" He shrugged. "Nowhere. Just felt like getting out. You in? I nodded, a little too fast. Yeah, just let me grab my hoodie. The ride was quiet at first. He let me pick the music. Windows cracked, late summer air spilling into the car. We drove out of the neighborhood and toward the edge of town, where the streets got narrower and the houses farther apart. Eventually, we pulled into a little clearing by the river, one of those local secret spots people only know about if they grew up nearby. Ben parked and killed the engine. We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds coming from the crickets and the water moving slowly nearby. "This is where I used to come when I needed to think," he said eventually, leaning back in his seat. After I graduated, before I moved to LA, I glanced at him. "You never seemed like the brooding type." Ben gave a short laugh. "Yeah, well, I'm not exactly the open book people think I am." I turned to face him, the space between us feeling tighter than it was. "Why'd you bring me here?" He didn't look at me right away, just stared ahead, hands resting on the steering wheel. "I don't know," he said quietly. "Felt like the right place." I didn't say anything. Ben finally turned his head, and our eyes locked. You ever feel like something's been sitting under the surface for a long time, and you're just now realizing it was always there? I felt my chest tighten. "Yeah," I said. "I do." Neither of us moved for a long second. Then Ben leaned in. It wasn't fast or dramatic. It was slow, almost hesitant, like he wasn't sure I'd meet him halfway. But I did. Our lips met, soft, cautious, but undeniably real. For a moment, the world stopped. There were no labels, no rules, no best friend's brother boundaries. Just him. Just me. Just that kiss. When we pulled apart, he exhaled shakily. "I wasn't planning that," he said. "Me neither," I replied, voice barely above a whisper. He reached up, fingers brushing my jaw like he wasn't sure if the moment had actually happened. "I don't want to screw this up," he said. "Whatever this is." "You already did," I said with a small smile. "But I think I'm okay with that." Ben laughed, a quiet, breathy sound, then leaned back in and kissed me again. And this time, there was no hesitation. We didn't talk much on the drive back, not because it was awkward, but because we didn't need to. His hand rested on the gear shift, and mine hovered just inches away, too aware of the space between us to actually close it, but not ready to pull away either. When we got home, Jesse was passed out on the couch, PlayStation controller in his hand, and a bowl of chips dangerously balanced on his chest. We walked past him like two people carrying a secret, neither of us saying anything as we went our separate ways down the hall. But that night, around 2 a.m., I heard it. A soft knock on my bedroom door. I sat up in bed, heart already racing. "Yeah?" The door creaked open. Ben stepped in, shirtless, just a pair of black sweats hanging low on his hips. "You awake?" he asked, even though the answer was obvious. "Yeah," I said, voice caught somewhere between a whisper and a breath. He didn't ask if he could come in. He just did, closing the door gently behind him like he was trying not to wake the house. I shifted over in bed, making space. He climbed in beside me. For a few seconds, we just laid there, facing the ceiling. The silence wasn't heavy, it was full, charged. "You okay?" I asked finally. Ben nodded. "I just couldn't sleep." I turned to face him, and he mirrored me. We were lying inches apart, breathing the same air. His eyes searched mine. "What are we doing?" I didn't have a good answer, so I gave him the only honest one I had. "Whatever this is," I said, "I don't want it to be nothing." His gaze flicked down to my mouth, then back up. "Yeah, me either." He reached over slowly, fingers brushing the side of my neck. I leaned in without thinking, and we kissed again. Slower this time, deeper. It felt like a decision. One of his hands slid into my hair. Mine found his chest, his skin warm under my palm. Our legs tangled. We pulled each other closer like we were trying to erase the space between us completely. And somewhere in that messy knot of limbs and breath and skin, I stopped thinking about Jesse, about what it meant, about whether this was right or wrong. It just was. We didn't sleep much that night, not for any dramatic reason. We just lay there trading quiet kisses, talking in half sentences, touching each other like we'd been waiting a long time to be allowed. Sometime around 4 a.m., I felt him fall asleep beside me, arms slung across my waist, breath warm against my neck. And I just laid there, staring at the ceiling again, but this time for a whole different reason. I wasn't confused anymore. I was terrified of what this would mean when the sun came up. I woke up to sunlight filtering through the blinds and the quiet sound of the house waking up. Ben was still there, arm draped across me, breathing slow and steady, his face so relaxed it barely looked like him. I wanted to stay in that moment, freeze it. But eventually, I had to move. I slipped out from under his arm as gently as I could and padded into the hallway. The house smelled like coffee. I froze for a second. Jesse was up. Great. I grabbed a hoodie off the hook and threw it on before heading into the kitchen. Jesse looked up from the French press. "Morning, zombie!" "Morning," I mumbled, trying to keep my face unreadable. "You sleep in? Must have been nice." I couldn't stay asleep past 7. "Stupid birds outside." I nodded, pouring myself a cup. Heart pounding. My body was here, but my brain was still in bed, with Ben. Then Ben walked in, still shirtless. His hair was messy, and he didn't look at me, just went straight for the fridge, grabbed the milk, and poured it into Jesse's cereal like it was any other day. "Sup," Jesse said without looking up. "Sup," Ben replied, dead calm, and that was it. No tension, no weird glances, just casual. I sat down, still unsure if last night had actually happened, or if Ben was just that good at pretending. We all ate breakfast like a normal trio of housemates, like my world hadn't tilted sideways 7 hours ago. When Jesse left to take a call outside, Ben finally looked at me. Quick, sharp, then he nodded toward the hallway. I followed him into the den. "Hey," he said, voice low now. "About last night." My chest tightened. "Yeah? I want you to know, it wasn't just heat of the moment. I wasn't drunk or confused or whatever excuse people use." I swallowed. "Okay." He ran a hand through his hair, like he was struggling to find the words. I need time to figure this out." I nodded. "Yeah, same." "But I don't want to pretend it didn't happen," he added quickly. "That's not what this is." "What is this?" I asked. I didn't mean it to sound sharp. It just came out that way, he exhaled. "I don't know, but it's something, and I don't want it to stop." That was enough for now. I didn't need a label. I just needed to know I hadn't imagined everything. We agreed to keep it quiet for a while. Especially from Jesse, that part was complicated. Neither of us wanted to blow up his world before we knew what we were even doing, so we started stealing time. Moments, glances when no one was watching, late-night visits, occasional brushes of hands that lingered too long in the hallway. It was risky, reckless, but it was also exhilarating. And then one night, it stopped being a secret because Jesse walked in. It happened on a Tuesday. Ben had come into my room late again. It wasn't supposed to be for long. Just a quick moment, a kiss, something that reminded us we weren't making this up. But one kiss turned into 2, then into hands under shirts, then into him crawling under the covers, both of us forgetting where we were. The door wasn't locked. I don't even remember it opening. But suddenly, Jesse's voice cut through the dark. "What the hell?" We froze. Ben's hand was on my chest, his face inches from mine. My heart stopped. Jesse stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable at first. But then it shifted. Hurt, anger, confusion, all flashing at once. Jesse, I started, but he turned and walked out before I could finish. Ben sat up, running both hands through his hair, already swearing under his breath. Shit. Shit. I threw on a hoodie and followed Jesse into the hallway. Jesse. Wait. He spun around, his voice sharp. How long? I stopped short. Don't lie to me, he snapped. I exhaled. A few weeks. He blinked. A few weeks? Ben came out behind me, shirtless, silent. Wow, Jesse muttered. You know, if it was some random hookup, whatever. But my brother? Seriously? I looked at him. We didn't plan it. That's not the point, he said, pacing now. You live here. You're my best friend. He's Ben. What the hell am I supposed to do with this? Ben finally spoke, voice low. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Jesse stared at him. No. Then what was the plan, Ben? Sleep with him in secret until what? Until I found out like this. Jesse, I said carefully, we were figuring it out. It wasn't about keeping it from you to hurt you. But you did keep it from me. That part, we couldn't argue with. Jesse stormed back into his room, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Ben and I stood there for a long second. Neither of us said anything. Eventually, I walked back into my room and sat on the edge of the bed, my whole body tense. Ben came in a minute later, closing the door gently. He looked wrecked. I messed this up. No, I said, voice flat. We messed it up. He sank into the chair across from me, rubbing his hands together. Do you regret it? I looked at him. Really looked. No, I said. But I hate that it had to come out like this. Ben nodded, eyes locked on the floor. I'll talk to him. I should talk to him first, I said. He deserves to hear it from me. That night was the longest we'd ever had in that house. The next morning, Jesse barely looked at either of us. I gave him space for a day, then two. But eventually, I knocked on his door. He opened it. Barely. I'm not trying to force anything, I said. I just want to talk. He let me in, and I had no idea how that conversation was going to end. Jesse didn't say anything when I walked in, just sat on the edge of his bed, arms crossed, face unreadable. I stood awkwardly by the door for a moment before finally sitting on the desk chair across from him. I'm not here to make excuses, I started. And I'm not going to pretend this didn't suck for you. He didn't look at me, just stared down at his hands. I should have told you, I continued. Not because you own either of us, but because you're my best friend, and I should have respected you enough to be honest. Still nothing. Just that heavy silence that felt way louder than words. I didn't plan on anything happening with Ben, I said. We weren't sneaking around to hurt you or lie to you. It just happened, and when it did, I didn't want to stop it. He finally looked up. Do you love him? The question hit harder than I expected. I don't know, I said. But I think I could. Jesse nodded slowly, lips pressed into a tight line. You know, I've been best friends with you for almost a decade. You're like family. I still am, I said quietly. Yeah, well, family usually doesn't screw you over behind your back. I looked down, feeling that gut punch guilt all over again. You're right. We sat in silence again, this one stretching longer. Eventually, Jesse let out a long breath and rubbed his face. This doesn't mean I'm okay with it, he said. But I'm not going to be the reason something good doesn't happen for you. I looked up, surprised. Wait. So, I'm pissed. Don't get me wrong, he said. But I've seen the way he looks at you, and the way you look at him. I'm not blind. Jesse, I need time, he said. But I'm not going to pretend like I didn't see this coming eventually. I laughed, just a little. Seriously? He rolled his eyes. Dude, Ben's been weird around you since you moved in. I just didn't think you'd both be dumb enough to fall into bed before having a real conversation. That part hurt, but he wasn't wrong. Fair, I muttered. Jesse leaned back on his bed and stared at the ceiling. Just don't lie to me again. Ever. About anything. I won't, I promised. And if he breaks your heart, I'm kicking both your asses. Deal. He cracked a small, reluctant smile. And for the first time in days, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. Later that night, I found Ben in the garage, working on some half-disassembled weight bench like it had personally offended him. Talk to Jesse, I said. He stood up straighter. How'd it go? Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped. He nodded. That sounds right. Then he looked at me, really looked, and took a step closer. So what now? He asked. I shrugged. We stop hiding. We figure it out. Together. Ben exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. I'd like that, he said. And when he kissed me this time, it didn't feel secret or stolen. It felt like a beginning.